Our next lecture is called Your Health, Your Choice. And because that's really what we're going to talk about. We have many choices that we can make, and these affect what we will be like, what the probability of diseases will be, all of these parameters. Now, we are actually fearfully and wonderfully made. And it is surprising that the human being can take so much abuse and still survive. And the fact that everything is still so normal is really very surprising. What are the risk factors affecting our health? Well, there are some things that you can change and some things that you cannot change. For example, if the environment gets to be very polluted, you can't very well jump off the planet. You're sort of restricted to this place. But there are other things, again, which you can avoid, which I like to call monsters in our lifestyles. Then there's something else about certain plants. We've looked at secondary plant compounds, phytochemicals that are healthy. Now, there are phytochemicals that are harmful in certain plants. And these harmful secondary compounds can cause various diseases. Now, why do plants have them? They say these plant compounds are for toxic defense. They are digestibility-reducing defense, and some of them are positive, like anticarcinogens. Bad ones are called alkaloids. Some are pyrethrins. You can use them as insecticides, for example, rotinoids, cyanogenic glycosides, tannin, for example, phenolic resins, caffeols, caffeine, theophylline, substances that you find in tea, for example, theobromine, a substance that you find in cocoa, nicotine, a substance that you find in tobacco plants, for example. Those are negative compounds that you want to avoid. Now, different plants have different compounds. All plants vary in the substances within them. And so the whole animal kingdom is spread over the plant kingdom. So certain animals will eat certain foods and no other foods. So, for example, the tobacco hornworm is a worm that feeds on tobacco plants. And it has an enzyme which neutralizes nicotine. So that worm can eat that plant from morning till night, and the nicotine is neutralized and excreted as though it weren't even there. But it's also attracted to the nicotine. It's its target, and it goes and it eats it. The koala bear is attracted to eucalyptus oils. And the eucalyptus oils are eaten and attracts the animal, and that's its diet. It sticks to that diet. Another animal comes along, tastes eucalyptus oil, and goes, doesn't eat it. And so the koala bear has assured that that's its diet. And so the animal kingdom is spread over the entire plant kingdom in the world. Now, it's very interesting that an ungulate, for example, the eland, which is the largest ungulate in the world, that goes along and it will eat acacia leaves. And the same happens as would happen in tea or in coffee. And we'll talk about that as we go along. Here's the coffee bean. That contains caffeols and it contains caffeine. Caffeine and theobromide, the one that you find in cocoa products, are very, very similar. Fatty acid concentration gets increased when you consume these. Blood pressure increases, stomach acid. Adrenaline, noradrenaline levels start increasing, gives you a fight and flight mechanism, a stress reaction. Digestion and absorption time is increased. Caffeine is toxic. It interferes with muscle action. It's an enzyme suppressant. It's a carcinogen. 500 grams of tea contains enough caffeine to kill 1,000 mice. That's just one packet of tea. And it's mutagenic. For example, tetragenicity, more than the normal number of fingers, hair lip, and cleft palate. If you feed rats caffeine, then they develop tetragenicity, more than the normal number of digits. Or they develop hair lips, cleft palate, and what they also develop is exencephaly. There's a higher incidence of exencephaly, the brain developing outside the body. And that's not too uncommon in the world today either. These are the substances that you find in tea, coffee, and cocoa. Theophylline you find in tea, theobromine you find in cocoa products, and caffeine you find in tea and in coffee. Now, these substances would normally prevent animals, other than those that are adapted for that particular compound, to stay away from those plants. And that is a way in which the animals are spread over the plant kingdom. Now, what happens when an animal consumes something that it's not geared for? Well, then it has all these negative reactions. So what happens when, for example, you take caffeine into your system? The first thing that happens, besides all those negative effects, is that the caffeine causes your adrenal gland to release hormones. Two of them, adrenaline and cortisone. And adrenaline is the fight and flight mechanism, hormone. So you are geared to defend yourselves or to run like blazes. One of those two, right? The cortisone, on the other hand, is there to prevent inflammation in case of damage. And it is also there to make sure you have enough energy to do the fighting and the running. So what happens is the cortisone affects the liver, and the liver releases huge amounts of glycogen into the bloodstream. And that's the same as taking a huge glass of sugar water. So you have all this sugar suddenly coming into the bloodstream, ready for the action, the stress reaction that you're going to take part in now. But why do people drink coffee? To go for a heavy run or to beat someone up? Yes or no? No, just to wake up. And where do they sit while they're doing it? At their desk at a computer. So what happens? All of a sudden you drink your coffee and you get a glucose surge. That means you wake up. And in actual fact, you're getting ready to run or defend yourself or beat someone up. But you don't. You just continue with a computer. So now what's your body going to do? It's going to say, whoa, I have an emergency here. So it has to react to this glucose surge, so it releases insulin, and down come your glucose levels. And then all of a sudden you're hypoglycemic, like we discussed just now. That means you're feeling lethargic, tired, stressed. What's the solution to the problem? I need another cup of coffee. So you get another cup of coffee, and you go through the same process over and over and over again. And instead of doing what you're telling your body is happening to you, you are shunting all of this into a totally different direction. It's the worst thing you could do with your body. Tea. Now here's a typical tea plantation. Look how nice and square it is. And there is my example of this nice animal, the eland. Now the animal that you see on the screen there does not eat tea. It eats acacia leaves. Now, the eland is attracted to acacia leaves, and the acacia leaves have tannin in them. Now, as the animal eats the acacia tree, the tree actually protects itself against overgrazing. So what happens, as the leaves are broken, they release a pheromone, and the pheromone warns the tree and the rest of the trees around something's breaking the leaves. It's a fascinating system. And the trees respond by increasing the levels of tannins in all the leaves. And then at a particular point, the eland will bite and the leaf is astringent. And so it will leave the tree and go somewhere else. It won't eat the tree next door because that one's been warned as well and also is impalatable. So he'll walk about 50 meters and then he'll start grazing again. And then the same happens, and that's why the animals graze and walk and graze and walk and graze and walk. It's a marvelous system. Evolutionists say it developed by evolution. I believe it's design. I believe God put it into the tree to prevent the eland from... What prevents this animal from just stripping the whole tree? What prevents it? Nothing. Here's a mechanism that tells it, enough for you, off you go and eat elsewhere. Now there's something else that's interesting. A tree wants to grow. And so the young leaves and the buds are protected as well by putting higher levels of these noxious compounds in the young leaves. We call it the ephemeral tissue, into the young leaves and buds. And then the animals come and eat, and they eat the older leaves rather than the young ones, because the young ones are impalatable to them. And that way, the tree can actually grow even though it is being grazed upon. That makes sense, doesn't it? Imagine if animals came along and only ate the young growth. The tree would never be able to grow. No plant would grow. That would be the end of it. So nature is designed so that there is no overgrazing and that plants can grow even though they are a food source for animals. It's actually a magnificent system. So now, what have we established? When these levels are high, they are deterrents to animal. They cause digestive problems. They cause repression of enzymes and functions such as that. So now let's see what happens when you go to gather tea. Notice that these plantations are square on top. And on the sides, they are square. How did that happen? See, what they do is they go and they have found out that it's not good to cut the leaves. The best is to take a long stick and to walk and to trim them. So they go, and they cut them this way. They trim them down to these nice square. That's how they prune them. What does that simulate? So you're breaking the leaves like this. What does that simulate? Yes, that's right. It simulates an animal eating the plants. What would be the natural reaction to the plants after this? To raise the level of compounds that act as deterrents. And when the young leaves then come out after that process, they will have higher levels of deterrence than in a plant that had not been treated in this way. Does that make sense? And then the pickers go out, and for the very best of teas, what do they collect? The two top leaves and a bud. Those have the highest levels of these noxious compounds in them that any self-respecting animal would avoid, but not man. Man picks them, and then what does he do with them? Well, he dries the leaf, and that he calls green tea. But that's not good enough for most people, so what they do is they take all these leaves. By the way, how does he dry them? By cutting down the forest, making huge amounts of smoke, and drying it that way. Then he takes this tea, and he puts it into fermentation vats, and he adds bacteria, and then he ferments them. Now, bacteria have to live. What do they live on? They live on everything that is edible in that leaf. And they ferment it away until it's all gone, and what remains in that leaf? Only that which is non-usable. So now, when you take that and you dry it again, what do you have then? Then you have high concentrations of toxins which no self-respecting animal would even get near to. It would be astringent, and it would be bitter, and it would be a taste and a metabolic deterrent. And what do we do with it? We make a solution, and we pour it into a cup, and then we say, drink it. Now do a baby test and give a cup of black tea to a little baby and watch its face. It'll take a sip and it'll go how? and spit it out, right? What do? Obviously, the thing is impalatable. It's as bitter as gall. It's full of toxins. We have to make it palatable. So what do we add? Sugar, because it's bitter. Now we add the sugar to take away the bitter. We are the stupidest animal on the planet, no doubt. You add the sugar, and then it's still astringent. So what do you add to prevent that, to make it smoother? You add cream. And then you can actually get this noxious compound down. And it's still so wickedly bad that you have to make a culture out of it. So you put it in a neat little cup and you raise the finger and you teach everyone that you have to drink it like this. And then you must say, ah, afterwards. And when you've learned that, you've become a tea drinker, right? And there is no animal as moronic on the face of the earth. No other animal would do that except man. So tea and coffee is bad, bad news. So I have good news for you. There are many, many plants out there that have very good phytochemicals in them, and herb teas are not made from 2 leaves and a bud. How do they make herb teas? They take the whole plant and they use the whole plant for herb teas. So that is the best way to go about it. And then I have another piece of good news for you. There are some herb teas on the market which taste just as bad as black tea. So you don't even have to give up anything. You just switch to a horrible herb tea, and then your problem is solved. And you add whatever you wanted to make it palatable. But the good news is there are herb teas that are actually palatable. So do yourselves a favor and a flavor, switch to herb teas and cut out the ones with the alkaloids. Sources of caffeine, for example, ground beans will give you 66 to 80 milligrams in a 2-cup drink. Filter drip will give you 110 to 180, so those are your typical coffees. Decaf will give you very little, but decaf contains the extractant, which is equally harmful because these are normally organic compounds with which they dissolve the caffeine out. So you're losing the caffeine, but you're gaining the extractant. Teas, as you see, are also quite rich in caffeines, and then your cola drinks also have caffeine. So Coke has a double whammy, 12 teaspoons of sugar, plus it has caffeine. It gives you a double whammy. So Coke actually should never be consumed by any human being. In fact, that company, well, what's the name of the product? Coke. Why? Because it's the extract of what? Cocaine plants. And these days they have to extract the drug, but it makes it addictive, or it used to in the past probably, and now they just add caffeine to solve that problem, because that'll make it also addictive, because they'll make you constantly hypoglycemic and on you go, and it makes it addictive. Chocolate products are bad, bad news. Look at all the products and the theobromines you get out of those. Cold remedies, weight control things, diuretics, they put these compounds into everything. For example, a simple slab of Cadbury milk chocolate, 1 ounce, will contain 44 milligrams of theobromine. Chocolate syrup, 2 teaspoons, 89 milligrams. Chocolate flavor, mixed milk, 120 milligrams. You give it to our kids all the time. I don't understand why we do that. These days you can buy soy milks that have got chocolate and cocoa products in them. Well, why don't they make one with carob? Why do they have to make it with caffeine and theobromine products? I wouldn't drink it. I'd just watch people drink it. Now, that's one thing we can avoid. Remember, this lecture is called Your Health, Your Choice. It is your choice whether you want to drink cocoa products, whether you want to drink teas and coffees, when you could drink herb teas, and you could replace your cocoa products with carob products and retrain your palate, and you don't really have to give up anything. you just switch to something.